I can't have children, but I'll raise yours." That's what the giant cowboy said, and folks haven't stopped talking since. He never asked for a family, never expected a little girl to call him Papa in front of the whole town. Now the church bell's ringing strange, the dust won't settle, and a quiet schoolteacher's secret is hanging by a thread. The preacher's watching, the sheriff's circling, and something buried in this town is about to rise. He can't give her a child, but what if he's the only one who can save her name? When the wind shifts and the town turns cold, who will stand between silence and grace? Before we begin, drop a hello in the comments. Share your corner of the world and how you're feeling today. It's a beautiful thing to witness how stories can connect us across oceans, languages, and lives. The spring breeze carried the sweet scent of peach pie across the schoolhouse lawn, mingling with the twang of fiddles and the cheerful chatter of Bitter Creek's finest. Red, white, and blue bunting fluttered from every post, catching the late afternoon sun like proud flags marking their little piece of civilization. Boaz Harrelson stood at the edge of the gathering, his broad shoulders making him stand out despite his best efforts to blend into the shadows of the cottonwood trees. His Sunday best sat stiffly on his frame, and he tugged at his collar, more comfortable in the familiar weight of work clothes than these starched celebrations. The townsfolk had outdone themselves this year. 3 long tables groaned under the weight of covered dishes, and the air was rich with the aroma of fried chicken and fresh-baked bread. Children darted between the adults' legs, their laughter rising above Mrs. Peterson's piano playing from the schoolhouse porch. Clara Voss stood near the punch bowl, a dark blue dress catching the wind as she poured cups for the elderly widow Jenkins. Her hair was pinned up neat as always, though a few strands had worked loose in the spring breeze. Bo noticed how she kept glancing at Ellie, who was playing hopscotch with the Cooper twins near the schoolhouse steps. The peaceful scene shattered when Jenny Cooper's shriek cut through the music. "The dog's got my ribbon!" A scraggly yellow cur had snatched the girl's hair ribbon and was making off with it, tail high in victory. Before anyone could stop her, little Ellie Voss went running after it, her red dress a bright flash against the dusty ground. "Ellie!" Clara's voice cracked with fear as she dropped the punch ladle. "Ellie, come back." The music stopped. Conversations died. Clara rushed toward the corral where her daughter had disappeared, her skirts gathered in trembling hands. The other mothers gathered their own children close, watching with worried eyes. Bo didn't hesitate. His long strides ate up the distance as he followed the small footprints in the dirt. They led past the corral, around the corner of the stable, toward the broken pen where old McCarthy used to keep his sheep. His heart hammered against his ribs, knowing how deep the old well was back there. "Ellie?" he called out, his deep voice gentle despite his fear. "You out here, little one." A small sniffle answered him. Bo rounded the corner of the stable and felt his chest loosen with relief. There sat Ellie in her dusty red dress, nursing a scraped knee. The yellow cur was nowhere in sight. "Looks like you took quite a tumble there," Bo said softly, crouching down beside her. Ellie's bottom lip trembled. The dog was too fast, and now my knee hurts. Well now, let's see about that. With careful movements that belied his size, Bo scooped her up in one strong arm. She weighed no more than a newborn calf, her little arms instinctively wrapping around his neck. He carried her back toward the social, her tears already drying against his shoulder. The crowd had gathered at the edge of the schoolhouse lawn, Clara at the front with her hands pressed to her mouth. When she saw them, her eyes filled with tears of relief. But before Clara could reach them, Ellie lifted her head from Bo's shoulder. Looking out at the watching crowd with the pure conviction only a child could muster, she declared, "You can be my papa now." The words fell like stones in a still pond. Bo felt the ripples of shocked whispers spread through the crowd. Clara's face went white as paper, then flushed deep red. Mrs. Peterson's hand flew to her throat, and old Mr. Jenkins started coughing into his handkerchief. Bo stood frozen, Ellie still cradled against him like a precious bundle of dandelion fluff. He could feel the weight of every stare, hear the wheels of gossip beginning to turn. Clara stepped forward, her hands shaking as she reached for her daughter. "Ellie, honey, come here," she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. Bo carefully transferred the child to her mother's arms, his rough hands lingering for just a moment as they brushed Clara's trembling fingers. Their eyes met briefly, hers wide with fear and something else he couldn't name, his steady but troubled. The crowd still stared, their whispers growing louder. "Well, I never," came Mrs. Peterson's voice. "The school mom and the ranch foreman," muttered another. Clara clutched Ellie closer, her face a mask of composure even as her eyes betrayed her panic. The spring wind caught her loose hair again, and Bo had to fight the urge to tuck it back for her. Instead, he stepped away, giving them space as the weight of Ellie's innocent words settled over the Founders' Day social like an approaching storm. Dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, but Bo's thoughts remained as dark as the fading night. He saddled his horse in the Harper Ranch stable, his movements mechanical as Ellie's words played over and over in his mind. "You can be my papa now." The leather creaked under his hands as he tightened the cinch. Such innocent words shouldn't weigh so heavy, but they did. They pressed down on his shoulders like a yoke he hadn't asked to bear, but couldn't ignore. Miles away in town, Clara stood before her classroom, maintaining a calm she didn't feel. 20 pairs of eyes watched her more closely than usual as she wrote out the day's lessons on the blackboard. The chalk scratched against the slate, matching the scrape of whispers behind her back. "Mama says Miss Voss is setting a cap for the ranch foreman," Sally Peterson stage whispered to Mary Jenkins. Clara's hand trembled slightly, but she kept writing. The morning stretched endless, filled with sidelong glances from students and knowing looks from parents who'd lingered at the schoolhouse door longer than usual. When the lunch bell finally rang, Clara couldn't get to the church fast enough. Her boots kicked up dust along the path as she hurried toward the white-painted building, seeking the comfort of prayer and Reverend Clay's counsel. She paused at the church steps, hearing voices from inside. The deep rumble of a man's voice mixed with the Reverend's measured tones. Clara's heart skipped when she recognized Bo's quiet drawl. "Don't mean to cause the lady trouble," Bo was saying. "Might be best if I keep my distance. Now, Boaz." Reverend Clay's voice carried the weight of wisdom. "Running from this won't serve anyone well." Clara pressed herself against the church wall, her conscience warring with her need to hear more. "The town's already talking," Bo continued. "Miss Voss has a position to protect, a reputation." "And what of Ellie?" the Reverend asked. "That child needs stability, Boaz, a father's guidance." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken pain. Clara knew why. She'd heard the whispers about Bo's inability to father children, a secret shared in hushed tones by the ranchers' wives. "I ain't fit for that role, Reverend. My past is past," Clay cut in firmly. "The Lord doesn't call the qualified, Boaz. He qualifies the called." Clara slipped away before she could hear more, her cheeks burning with shame at her eavesdropping. She spent the afternoon in a fog, barely noticing when her students filed out for the day. The sun was setting when Reverend Clay made his way to Bo's line shack on the edge of the Harper spread. Orange light spilled across the prairie grass, casting long shadows as the preacher's buggy rolled to a stop. Bo stood in the doorway of his modest home, wiping his hands on a cloth. The smell of coffee and beans drifted from inside, simple bachelor fare. "Evening, Reverend," Bo said, stepping aside to let the older man enter. "Twice in one day. Must be important." Clay settled into the room's single chair, while Bo leaned against the rough-hewn table. The preacher's eyes took in the sparse furnishings, a narrow bed, a shelf of well-worn books, a Bible on the windowsill. "I've come to speak plain, Boaz," Clay began, folding his weathered hands in his lap. "About Clara Voss and her little girl." Bo's shoulders tensed. "Said my piece this morning, Reverend. And now you'll hear mine." Clay's voice was gentle but firm. "That woman needs a husband. That child needs a father. And you, son, need a family." I can't give her children, Bo said, the words rough as sandpaper. She deserves better than a barren marriage. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Boaz. Sometimes the children we're meant to raise aren't the ones we birth. Clay leaned forward, his eyes intent. That little girl already loves you, and I've seen how you look at Clara, like a man dying of thirst trying not to stare at water. Bo turned to the window, his broad shoulders tight with tension. The last rays of sunlight caught his face, highlighting the struggle there. Marriage is more than just bearing children, Clay continued. It's about building a life together, creating a home, being the kind of man who can guide a child's heart, even if she doesn't share your blood. And if Clara doesn't want, that's between you and her to discover, Clay interrupted, standing slowly. But first, you need to decide if you're willing to offer her the choice. The Reverend moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. Think on it, son. Sometimes the legacy we're meant to leave isn't written in our blood. It's written in the lives we touch. The morning sun beat down on Clara's back as she marched toward Bo's line shack. Her anger burned hotter than the spring heat, fueled by the whispers that had followed her through town about Reverend Clay's matchmaking efforts. The nerve of these men plotting her future without so much as asking her opinion. The small cabin came into view, smoke curling from its chimney. Bo stood in the dooryard, splitting wood with methodical strokes. He paused mid-swing when he spotted her, carefully setting the axe aside. "Miss Voss," he said quietly, wiping his hands on his trousers. "How dare you!" Clara's voice trembled with fury. "How dare you and Reverend Clay discuss my future as if I were some helpless creature in need of saving?" Bo's expression remained calm, though his eyes showed concern. "Mum, I don't need your pity, Mr. Harrelson." She drew herself up to her full height, though she barely reached his shoulder. "I've managed just fine on my own, and I won't have men deciding what's best for me and my—" She caught herself. "For me and Ellie." "Never meant to cause offense," Bo said softly, "and I made no decisions." His quiet dignity in the face of her anger made Clara falter. She'd expected defensiveness, perhaps even anger in return. Instead, his steady gaze held nothing but respect. "The Reverend spoke his piece," Bo continued, "but I wouldn't presume to make choices about your life without your say-so." "That ain't right." Clara's anger deflated slightly. "Then why meet with him at all?" "Because he asked, and I respect him." Bo's words were simple but sincere. "But I won't mock you or your situation by making promises I ain't sure I can keep." The honesty in his voice made Clara's cheeks burn with shame over her outburst. She smoothed her skirts, struggling to maintain her dignity. "I should return to the school." Bo nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "Good day, Miss Voss." Later that afternoon, Bo rode along the creek that marked the Harper Ranch's boundary. The spring runoff had made the water swift and deep, and something about its rushing made him uneasy. Then he saw her, a small figure in a blue dress, walking alone along the fence line. His heart jumped into his throat. "Ellie!" The child turned, her face lighting up. "Mr. Bo." He urged his horse forward, relief flooding through him when he saw she was safely away from the water's edge. "What are you doing out here, little lady?" "Looking for pretty rocks," she said, holding up her pockets full of stones. "For Mama's desk." Bo swung down from his saddle. "School ain't out yet. Does your mama know where you are?" Ellie's bottom lip quivered. "No, sir." "Then I reckon we'd best get you back." He lifted her onto his horse, gathering the reins. "Your mama must be worried sick." They walked back to town, Ellie chattering about her rock collection while Bo led the horse. At the schoolhouse, Clara stood on the porch, her face pale with worry as she spoke to several townspeople who'd gathered to help search. "Mama!" Ellie called out. Clara ran to them, gathering Ellie into her arms. "Where were you? I've been so frightened." "Found her by the creek," Bo explained. collecting rocks." Clara pressed her face into Ellie's hair, hiding tears of relief. "Thank you, Mr. Harrelson. I don't know what I would have done if—" "No need for thanks," Bo said gently. "Let me help her with her coat." He lifted Ellie down, helping her out of the worn jacket she wore. As he did, a folded paper fell from the pocket. Bo picked it up, meaning to return it when the official letterhead caught his eye, a birth certificate from the territorial office. His eyes fell on the words before he could stop himself. Under Mother's name was written clearly, Clara Elizabeth Voss. Not Aunt. Mother. Bo's heart squeezed in his chest. He glanced at Clara, who was still fussing over Ellie, unaware of the paper in his hands. So many things suddenly made sense. The careful way she guarded her reputation, her fierce protection of Ellie, the way she'd rebuilt her life in Bitter Creek, where no one knew her past. Without a word, Bo folded the certificate and slipped it back into the coat pocket. Some truths weren't his to share, some burdens weren't his to judge. "Here you go, little lady," he said, helping Ellie back into her coat. "Best stay close to school from now on." Clara met his eyes, and something in his expression made her pause. But Bo simply touched his hat and turned to go, carrying her secret with him like a sacred trust. The morning sun had barely cleared the mountains when Clara heard the telegraph office's bell jingling down the street. Young Tommy Harper, the operator's son, came running toward the schoolhouse with a yellow envelope clutched in his hand. "Miss Voss, important telegram for you." Clara's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The children watched curiously as she read, her face growing paler with each line. The Territorial Land Office's message was clear. Her claim to the schoolhouse property required either marriage or outright land ownership within 6 months. Her temporary teaching contract wouldn't suffice. She dismissed the children early for lunch, needing time to think. But before she could gather her thoughts, Mrs. Whittaker burst through the schoolhouse door, face flushed with excitement. "Did you hear? The railroad's buying up land, right here, next to the school." She waved a notice in her hand. "Town council just got word. They're planning track expansion." Clara sank into her chair. The railroad meant change, and change meant scrutiny. Already she'd caught whispers around town since the Founders' Day social. That teacher, letting her girl call strange men papa, what kind of example? Perhaps we need someone more suitable. By afternoon, the whispers had grown louder. Clara overheard Mrs. Peterson telling the mercantile owner that she'd be withdrawing her children at term's end. "Can't have them learning from someone of questionable character," she'd said, loud enough to carry. That evening, Clara walked the familiar path to Bo's line shack, her heart heavy, but her mind made up. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. She found him on the porch, mending tack. "Mr. Harrelson," she said formally, though her voice wavered. "Might I have a word?" Bo set aside his work, studying her face. "Something's troubling you." Clara took a deep breath. "I have a proposition, one that might benefit us both." He gestured to the other chair, waiting patiently as she gathered her thoughts. "The land office requires marriage or property ownership for my teaching claim," she explained. "And with the railroad coming—" She twisted her hands in her lap. "The town's opinion of me is shifting." "I've heard the talk," Bo said quietly. "I need to secure my position, for Ellie's sake." Clara met his eyes. "I'm proposing a courtship, in name only, of course. It would give me time to find a solution, and it would—" She swallowed hard. "It would quiet the gossip." Bo was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "That's a mighty practical arrangement you're suggesting." "Yes, well." Clara lifted her chin. "I'm a practical woman." "And what about Ellie?" His voice was gentle. "Wouldn't be right to give her false hope." Clara's composure cracked slightly. "I would never intentionally hurt her, but I have to protect her future. This is the only way I can see to do it." Bo leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I'll agree, he said slowly, but I have conditions. Clara nodded, relief and anxiety warring in her chest. First, there has to be honesty between us. No more secrets. His eyes held hers meaningfully, and Clara wondered if he somehow knew about Ellie's birth certificate. Second, if this leads to marriage, it won't be just for convenience. I won't make vows I don't mean to keep. You're saying? I'm saying we court proper, get to know each other true. Maybe we find something real. Maybe we don't. He shrugged. But we give it an honest chance. Clara hadn't expected this response. She'd prepared for rejection or immediate acceptance, not this middle ground that required more of her heart than she'd planned to risk. And if we don't? She asked softly. Find something real. Then at least we'll know we tried. Beau stood, his tall frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. I'll walk you back to town. We can start the gossip tonight as well as any other time. As they walked through Bitter Creek's quiet streets, Clara felt the weight of watching eyes from lamplit windows. By morning, everyone would know that Beau Harrelson was courting the schoolteacher. It wasn't quite the arrangement she'd imagined, but as his steady presence beside her kept the evening chill at bay, she wondered if perhaps God had other plans than her practical solution. At her door, Beau touched his hat brim. Good evening, Miss Voss. Good evening, Mr. Harrelson. Clara paused, then added softly, Thank you. His smile was gentle in the lamplight. We'll see where this path leads. The next morning dawned bright and clear, with songbirds welcoming the sun. Beau waited at the corner of Pine and Main, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the dusty street. When Clara and Ellie appeared, the little girl's face lit up like sunshine through clouds. Beau! Ellie broke free from Clara's hand and ran to him, her small boots kicking up puffs of dirt. Morning, little lady. Beau tipped his hat, then nodded to Clara. Miss Voss. Together, they walked toward the schoolhouse, Ellie skipping between them. Several townsfolk paused in their morning routines to watch the trio pass. Mrs. Peterson, sweeping her storefront, pressed her lips together, but said nothing. The sight of the formidable ex-gunslinger carrying a child's tin lunch pail while she chatted about her favorite doll seemed to soften even the hardest expressions. That evening, Clara set 3 places at her small porch table. The late spring air carried the scent of lilacs from her tiny garden. Beau arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, a bundle of fresh-caught trout wrapped in brown paper tucked under one arm. Caught these in the creek, he said, presenting them to Clara. Thought you might enjoy something fresh. While Clara prepared the fish, Beau sat with Ellie on the porch steps. She proudly showed him her primer, pointing to letters she recognized. His large, calloused finger followed her small one across the page, his brow furrowed in concentration. This here's a hard one, he admitted, stumbling over a word. Clara paused in the doorway, watching as Ellie patiently helped him sound it out. Caterpillar, the child said carefully. Caterpillar, Beau repeated, smiling. Well, ain't that something? The next afternoon found them at the Harper Ranch's south fence line. Clara held the wire steady while Beau demonstrated how to splice a brake. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, twisting the metal strands together. Like braiding hair, Clara observed, trying the technique herself. Reckon so, Beau agreed, though I ain't had much experience with that particular skill. Clara's first attempt was clumsy, but Beau nodded approvingly. That'll hold. Sometimes the prettiest work ain't the strongest. When Sunday arrived, they attended church together. Reverend Clay's sermon spoke of new beginnings and God's perfect timing. Afterward, they shared a picnic lunch under the old oak tree behind the schoolhouse. Ellie had brought her favorite cloth horse, showing Beau how it could gallop across the blanket. Without hesitation, she climbed into his lap, leaning back against his chest as she continued her game. Beau's hands, so large they could span Ellie's whole back, gently steadied her. The simple trust in the gesture brought unexpected tears to Clara's eyes. Beau caught her watching and smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Then he laughed at something Ellie whispered, the sound rich and warm as summer honey. Clara found herself smiling back, surprised by how natural it felt. As evening approached, they walked home slowly, Ellie drowsing in Beau's arms. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting long shadows across the quiet street. "Thank you," Clara said softly, after they'd tucked Ellie into bed. Beau paused on the porch steps. "For what?" "For this calm you bring." She gestured vaguely at the peaceful scene, the crickets starting their evening song, the lamplight spilling golden through the window, the gentle rhythm their days had found. "I'd forgotten what it felt like, not to be afraid all the time." Beau was quiet for a moment, his hat in his hands. "Truth is, I never imagined this kind of life for myself, after everything that happened." He trailed off, then continued slowly. "But being here, with you and Ellie, it feels right, like maybe this is what I was meant for all along." Clara's heart quickened at the sincerity in his voice. This wasn't part of their arrangement, this warm certainty building between them. Yet she couldn't bring herself to fear it. "Yes," she whispered, "it does feel right." Beau placed his hat back on his head, touching the brim in farewell. As Clara watched him walk away in the gathering dusk, she realized their practical arrangement had grown into something neither of them had expected, something true and strong and full of promise. Through the open window, she heard Ellie murmur in her sleep. The sound mingled with the evening breeze and the distant lowing of cattle, creating a melody of home that seemed to echo the quiet joy in her heart. Morning sunlight streamed through the schoolhouse windows as Clara guided her students through their reading lesson. The fresh spring air carried the scent of wild roses through the open windows, and somewhere outside, a meadowlark trilled its morning song. The tortoise moved slowly but steadily. Tommy Wilson read aloud from his primer, finger tracking each word. The floorboards creaked, and Clara looked up to see Sheriff Amos Cutter's tall frame filling the doorway. His badge caught the morning light, and his expression was grave beneath the brim of his hat. "Miss Voss," he said, touching the brim, "might I have a word?" Clara's heart quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "Children, please continue reading silently while I step outside." The sheriff followed her onto the schoolhouse steps. Behind them, the low murmur of children reading drifted through the open door. "I've received formal notice from the railroad company," Cutter said, producing an official-looking document from his vest pocket. "Their filing for the land purchase is moving forward faster than expected." Clara's fingers trembled slightly as she took the paper. "But surely the school board—" "The board's hands are tied, Miss Voss." His voice held a note of satisfaction that made her stomach clench. "Without proper claim to the land, your position here becomes uncertain." "I see." Clara folded the paper carefully, refusing to let him see her fear. "Thank you for delivering this notice, Sheriff." He lingered a moment longer, studying her face. "Times are changing, Clara. Might be wise to consider your options." She turned away, spine straight as a fence post, and returned to her classroom. The children's voices washed over her like a familiar hymn, but her mind was elsewhere, on Ellie, on Beau, on the precarious life she'd built in Bitter Creek. As evening settled over the town, Beau walked down Main Street, his boots raising small clouds of dust. The saloon's windows glowed amber in the gathering dusk, and voices drifted from the alley beside it. "Can't have that kind of scandal associated with our school," came Councilman Porter's voice. "Railroad's watching every move we make." Beau slowed his steps, lingering in the shadows. "Heard tell that child of hers wasn't her sister's at all," another voice added. "Born right out of wedlock, if you ask me." "That'd be grounds enough to remove her," Porter agreed. Save us the trouble of fighting the railroad's claim." Beau's hands clenched into fists. The old familiar heat rose in his chest, the instinct that had once made him feared from Texas to Dakota Territory. 3 steps would take him around that corner. 3 steps to confront men who'd destroy a woman's life with whispered words and half-truths. "Evening, Beau." Reverend Clay's quiet voice cut through his anger. The preacher stood in the gathering darkness, his Bible tucked under one arm. "Reverend." Beau's voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "Walk with me a spell?" It wasn't really a question. The preacher's kind eyes held understanding and warning in equal measure. They moved away from the saloon, past the darkened storefronts. When they reached the church, Reverend Clay spoke again. "I remember the day you came to me, Beau. Remember the vow you made to choose mercy over might." That was different. Beau's jaw worked. These men aimed to hurt Clara, hurt Ellie. And would violence solve that? The preacher's voice was gentle. Or would it only confirm their worst suspicions about both of you? Beau closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his past pressing down like a winter storm. The memory of that terrible day when his quick temper and quick draw had resulted in an innocent's death still haunted his dreams. "There are other ways to fight injustice," Reverend Clay continued. "Ways that don't require fists or firearms." The truth of those words slowly seeped into Beau's anger like water into parched earth. Clara needed his strength now, but not the kind that came from violence. She needed the strength he'd learned since laying down his guns, the strength to stand steady in the face of cruelty, to choose wisdom over wrath. "You're right," Beau said finally. "Reckon I needed reminding." The preacher squeezed his shoulder. "The Lord doesn't give us more than we can handle, Beau, but sometimes He does give us more than we can handle alone." Beau nodded, his anger settling into something calmer, but no less determined. As he walked home through the quiet streets, he could still hear the council members' voices, still feel the threat to Clara and Ellie. But now, instead of his fists, his mind turned to other solutions: legal papers that needed filing, witnesses who could speak to Clara's character, truths that could be revealed in their own time. The moon rose over Bitter Creek, casting long shadows across the empty street. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight Beau had kept his vow. And somehow, that felt like its own kind of victory. Wednesday morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of spring day that promised warmth by noon. Beau adjusted the cinch on his bay gelding, while Clara secured her carpet bag to her mare's saddle. The town of Bitter Creek was just stirring to life as they mounted up and headed east toward Marshall City. The steady clip-clop of hooves marked their progress along the dusty road. Fields of new wheat stretched green toward the horizon, and meadowlarks called from fence posts. Beau kept his horse at an easy pace beside Clara's, watching how she held herself straight in the saddle, proper as Sunday service. "Reckon we'll make Marshall City by mid-afternoon," Beau said, breaking the morning quiet. "Plenty of time to file the paperwork at the land office." Clara nodded, her hands tight on the reins. "Thank you for doing this, Beau. I know it's not how you planned to spend your savings." "Money's just a tool," he replied. "Like a good rope or a strong fence. What matters is how you use it." The morning wore on, sun climbing higher as they followed the winding road. They passed scattered homesteads and grazing cattle, exchanging few words. But in the space between them, unspoken thoughts gathered like storm clouds. Near noon, they stopped to rest the horses by a creek. Beau spread his coat on a flat rock for Clara to sit, then loosened the horses' girths. Clara watched him move with that quiet efficiency she'd come to appreciate. "Beau," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you. About Ellie." He turned from the horses, reading the tension in her shoulders. Settling beside her on the rock, he waited. Clara's fingers twisted in her skirt. "The story I told when I came to Bitter Creek, about being Ellie's aunt, it wasn't true." She drew a shaky breath. "Ellie is my daughter, mine alone." Beau remained still, giving her space to continue. I was teaching in Kansas City when it happened. The man, he made promises. When I told him about the baby, he disappeared." Tears gathered in her eyes. "My family wanted me to give her up, said it was the only way to save my reputation. But I couldn't. She was mine. So you came west," Bo said softly. Clara nodded. "Changed my name. Told everyone I was caring for my widowed sister's child. It was the only way I could keep teaching, keep providing for her." She looked at him finally. Fear and defiance mingled in her gaze. "I won't apologize for protecting my daughter." "Ain't asking you to," Bo said. They remounted and rode on, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. Clara spoke haltingly of those early days, the terror of discovery, the lonely nights, the joy of watching Ellie grow despite it all. Bo listened, offering nothing but his steady presence. The sun was setting when they reached Marshall City, painting the buildings in shades of gold and purple. At the Golden Rose Inn, Bo secured 2 rooms while Clara arranged for a hot meal. The common room was quiet, just a few travelers gathered around the large stone hearth. They sat in worn leather chairs near the fire, bowls of stew warming their hands. The flames cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, and somewhere in the kitchen, dishes clinked softly. "You must think less of me now," Clara said into the comfortable silence. Bo set his empty bowl aside. "No, ma'am, I don't." "But surely, you ain't ruined," Bo interrupted gently. "You just didn't have someone to stand beside you." He met her gaze steadily. "Maybe now you do." Clara's breath caught at the simple truth in his words. The firelight softened his features, revealing the tender heart behind his quiet strength. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you choose this?" "Because some things are worth more than a good name," Bo said. "Like love. Like family." He smiled slightly. "Like a little girl who sees past what folks think they know about a man." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of recognition, of finding, at last, someone who saw her whole truth and didn't turn away. They sat together in the firelight, letting the weight of honesty settle between them like a warm blanket. Outside, stars emerged in the darkening sky, and somewhere down the street, a church bell tolled the evening hour. Tomorrow would bring paperwork and practical matters, but tonight, in this quiet room, something deeper than property rights was being claimed. The journey back to Bitter Creek took longer than expected. Mid-morning, Clara's mare stumbled slightly, and Bo noticed the loose shoe right away. He dismounted to check, his weathered hands gentle on the horse's leg. "Front shoe's about to come off," he said, straightening up. "We'll need to lead her careful-like until we reach Miller's Forge." Clara gathered her skirts and dismounted. "How far?" 3, maybe 4 miles. Bo adjusted his hat against the climbing sun. "Might have to share my horse part way if you don't mind." The delay meant walking their horses through the heat of the day. Bo insisted Clara ride his gelding while he led both animals, his long stride eating up the dusty miles. They talked little, but the silence felt comfortable now, like a well-worn quilt. At Miller's Forge, the blacksmith worked quickly, but the stop cost them precious afternoon hours. The sun was already setting when they finally caught sight of Bitter Creek's church steeple in the distance. "Look there." Bo pointed toward the schoolhouse. Light spilled from its windows, unusual for this hour. As they drew closer, they could make out several figures moving about inside. The door opened, and Reverend Clay's wife Martha stepped out, Ellie's small hand in hers. "Mama!" Ellie broke free and ran toward them, her dark curls bouncing. "Papa, Bo!" Clara stiffened slightly at the name, but Bo was already swinging down from his saddle. He caught Ellie as she launched herself at him, her arms wrapping tight around his neck. "Did you bring me something?" Ellie asked, her face bright with hope. Bo reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small paper-wrapped package. "Might be something in here." Martha Clay approached, smiling warmly. "Welcome home. We've been keeping busy with reading and baking while you were away." She lowered her voice. "Though you should know, the whole town's talking. The land claim ruling is set to be read after Sunday service." Clara's hand tightened on her reins. "So soon?" "Best to face it head on," Bo said quietly. He set Ellie down so she could open her gift, a tiny carved wooden horse. "It's perfect!" Ellie exclaimed. She looked up at Bo, her eyes serious suddenly. "Can I call you Papa for real now? Since you and Mama went to get married papers?" The evening breeze stirred the schoolyard dust as Clara caught her breath. But before she could speak, Bo knelt down in front of Ellie, taking her small hand in his large one. "If it's all right with your ma," he said softly, his eyes meeting Clara's. Clara saw the quiet certainty in his gaze, the gentle way he held Ellie's hand. This man who had once been feared for his gun hand now used those same hands to lift her daughter, to mend fences, to build a future none of them had expected. "Yes," Clara whispered. "Yes, it's all right." Ellie's smile could have lit up the darkening sky. She threw her arms around Bo's neck again, then around Clara's waist. "Now we're real family." Later that night, after Ellie was tucked into bed with her wooden horse, Clara sat alone in her small parlor. The lamp cast soft shadows on the walls as she knelt beside her chair, hands clasped. "Lord," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I've spent so long being strong, so long keeping walls up to protect us, but now—" She paused, tears gathering. "Now you've sent someone who sees past those walls, someone who chooses us just as we are." A night bird called outside her window. In the distance, a coyote answered. "Give me strength," Clara prayed, "not to be strong anymore. Strength to let myself be loved, to let Ellie have the father she deserves, to trust that sometimes your greatest gifts come wrapped in ways we never expected." She remained kneeling for a long moment, letting peace settle over her like evening dew. Through her window, she could see Bo's silhouette as he made one final check of the schoolyard before heading to his lodgings. His steps were steady, purposeful, like his heart. Clara touched the window glass lightly. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The land claim ruling loomed, and not everyone in Bitter Creek would celebrate their unconventional family. But tonight, in the quiet of her home, Clara felt something shift inside her, like a door long rusted shut finally opening to let in fresh air and sunlight. Her daughter had a father. She had a partner. And maybe, just maybe, they all had a chance at the kind of love that healed old wounds and built new dreams. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright over Bitter Creek. The church bell's deep tones rolled across the prairie, calling folks to worship. Bo adjusted his string tie one final time before walking the short distance to Clara's house. His boots, polished to a shine, kicked up little puffs of dust along the way. Clara and Ellie waited on their porch, both wearing their finest dresses. Ellie's dark curls had been carefully braided with a blue ribbon that matched her mother's dress. When she saw Bo approaching, she bounced on her toes with excitement. "You look mighty fine," Bo said softly to Clara, offering his arm. Clara's cheeks colored as she took it. "As do you." They walked together towards the church, Ellie skipping ahead. Townsfolk were already gathering on the steps, their Sunday best brightening the morning. Conversations hushed as Bo and Clara approached, arm in arm. Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, couldn't contain her curiosity. "Are the rumors true, then?" she asked, her eyes fixed on Clara's arm linked through Bo's. "Are you two engaged?" Clara lifted her chin slightly. The morning sun caught the silver cross at her throat as she answered, "Yes, we are." Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through prairie grass. Some faces lit with genuine pleasure. Martha Clay beamed, and old Mr. Wilson tipped his hat in approval. Others, like Sheriff Cutter standing near the back, wore darker expressions. But none of that seemed to matter when Ellie threw her arms around both their legs. "Mama and Papa are getting married," she announced to anyone who would listen, her joy pure and infectious. After the service, tables were set up on the church lawn for the traditional Sunday social. Checkered cloths fluttered in the breeze, laden with fried chicken, cornbread, and Mrs. Clay's famous apple pies. The afternoon filled with the sounds of children playing and adults chatting, while someone played fiddle tunes near the oak tree. Beau found himself drawn into conversations with ranch hands and merchants alike. His usual silence gave way to quiet smiles as he watched Clara and Ellie share plates of food with other families. Something had shifted in him these past weeks, like winter giving way to spring. As the afternoon mellowed toward evening, the fiddler struck up a slower tune. Beau crossed the lawn to where Clara sat, watching Ellie play with other children. "Might I have this dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Clara hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. He led her to where other couples swayed beneath the open sky, the setting sun painting everything in soft gold. Beau's hand settled carefully at her waist as they began to move with the music. Clara's dress rustled softly against the grass, and the breeze carried the scent of her rose water. "I never thought," Clara began quietly. "Nor did I," Beau answered, understanding her unfinished thought. They turned slowly, lost in the moment. The music wrapped around them like a tender blessing. Clara's head tilted slightly toward Beau's shoulder, and his hand tightened just a fraction at her waist. "Miss Voss." Sheriff Cutter's voice cut through their peace like a knife. They stopped dancing, though Beau didn't release Clara's hand. "Sheriff." Clara's voice was steady, but Beau felt her tension. Cutter held out an official-looking document. "This just came by telegraph. The territorial court has made its ruling on your land claim." His eyes flickered between them. "It's been denied. The railroad's offer stands. They own the property now." Clara's fingers went cold in Beau's grasp. The paper trembled slightly as she took it with her free hand. "But the school," she whispered. "You have until the end of the month to vacate the premises," Cutter said, not unkindly, but with finality. Beau's free hand clenched into a fist at his side. The old instinct rose in him, to fight, to defend. But he remembered his vow, remembered the path he'd chosen. Instead of anger, he drew Clara closer to his side. Around them, the music had stopped. Other dancers stood frozen, watching. Ellie ran up, sensing her mother's distress. "Mama?" she asked, clutching at Clara's skirts. Clara's heart sank as she looked down at her daughter, then at the paper in her hand. Everything they'd built here, her teaching, their home, their future, seemed to crumble like dry earth. Beau's jaw worked silently as he stood beside them, his arm still supporting Clara. His fists remained clenched, but he said nothing. The setting sun cast long shadows across the church lawn as they stood there, a family united in their uncertainty, while whispers once again rippled through the watching crowd. The moon cast long shadows across Beau's path as he rode back to his line shack that night. His horse's hooves kicked up dust that settled on his already heavy heart. He couldn't bring himself to face Clara after the land ruling, not with the weight of the town's judgment pressing down on them both. Inside his sparse dwelling, Beau sat at his rough-hewn table, a cold cup of coffee untouched before him. The clock on the wall ticked away the hours as he wrestled with what needed to be done. By dawn, his decision sat bitter, but firm in his chest. Morning brought no comfort to Bitter Creek. Whispers followed Clara as she made her way to the schoolhouse. Ladies who'd smiled at her just days before now crossed the street to avoid speaking. Even the mercantile owner, usually chatty, merely nodded as she passed. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Peterson's voice carried across the street. "A woman with her background, teaching our children." "And that poor Mr. Harrelson," another voice added. Surely he didn't know what he was getting into. By midday, Clara received a summons to appear before the school board. 5 stern-faced men sat behind a long table in the town hall, their expressions grave as granite. Mr. Wilson, the head of the board, cleared his throat. "Miss Voss?" he began, folding his hands. "In light of recent developments, we feel it best to address your position directly." Clara stood straight-backed before them, her hands clasped tightly at her waist. "Yes, sir. We're prepared to offer you 3 months' wages as severance," Mr. Wilson continued, "in exchange for your quiet departure from Bitter Creek." The words struck like physical blows. "I have done nothing wrong," Clara said, her voice barely steady. "Perhaps not," another board member added. "But appearances matter in a position of moral authority. Think of the children." Clara thought of Ellie, waiting at the preacher's house. "My daughter would surely benefit from a fresh start elsewhere." Mr. Wilson cut in smoothly. "For everyone's sake." Bo heard about the meeting within hours. The news settled like lead in his stomach as he worked the fence line. He'd seen good people broken by scandal before. Clara deserved better than to be driven out in shame. That afternoon, Bo rode into town. He knew what he had to do, though it felt like cutting out his own heart. He spotted Clara leaving the mercantile, paper-wrapped packages in her arms. Ellie played with a stick horse on the wooden porch nearby. "Miss Voss!" Bo called out, his voice carrying across the street. Several townspeople stopped to watch. Clara turned, hope flickering across her face. "Bo?" He kept his expression hard as stone. "This has gone far enough." "What do you mean?" Clara stepped closer, confusion clouding her features. "This arrangement between us," Bo said loudly enough for others to hear. "It was never real, just a convenient solution to your problems." Clara's packages slipped from suddenly numb fingers. "Bo, please, I won't be party to any more of this," he continued, each word feeling like ground glass in his throat. "Find someone else to save you." The crack of Clara's palm against his cheek echoed in the sudden silence. Bo didn't flinch, though her handprint burned on his skin. Clara stood trembling before him, tears bright in her eyes but refusing to fall. "How dare you?" she whispered. On the porch, Ellie had stopped playing. Her small face crumpled as she watched the scene unfold. "Papa?" she called out, uncertainty making her voice waver. Bo forced himself not to look at the little girl who'd claimed his heart. He couldn't bear to see the trust dying in her eyes. Instead, he touched the brim of his hat with cold formality. "Good day, Miss Voss," he said, then turned and walked away. Behind him, he heard Ellie's confused sob. "Mama, why is Papa leaving?" Clara's voice shook as she answered. "He's not your Papa, sweetheart." He never was. Bo's boots felt like lead as he mounted his horse. He could feel the weight of watching eyes, some satisfied, others pitying. He'd done what needed doing. Clara would be free to leave now, with her dignity intact, not run out of town as a fallen woman. But as he rode away, the sound of Ellie's crying followed him like a ghost on the wind. The sacrifice he'd made to protect them carved an empty space in his chest where hope had lived such a short time. The afternoon sun cast his shadow long and lonely across the dirt street as he rode back toward his empty line shack, leaving behind the family he'd dared to dream might be his own. The next 3 days settled over Bitter Creek like a heavy blanket, muffling life's usual rhythms. Clara moved through her classroom mechanically, her voice hollow as she taught lessons she'd soon hand over to another. Each evening, she pulled another box from beneath her bed, filling it with books, letters, and memories. Ellie sat in the corner of their small home, her cloth doll untouched in her lap. Her eyes followed Clara's movements, dark with questions she was too young to fully form. "Mama?" she asked on the second night, her small voice breaking the silence. "Did we make Papa Bo mad?" Clara's hands stilled over the box she was packing. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt, even when they don't want to." "But why doesn't he love us anymore?" The innocent question struck Clara like a physical blow. She crossed the room and gathered Ellie into her arms, breathing in the sweet scent of her daughter's hair. Some things are hard to understand, even for Mama. Ellie's lower lip trembled. I miss him. I know, darling, I know. Out at the Harper Ranch, Bo threw himself into his work with grim determination. He mended fences until his hands bled, drove cattle until his horse was spent, anything to keep his mind from wandering back to town. But every time he passed the schoolhouse on his supply runs, his chest tightened with an ache no amount of physical labor could ease. On the third morning, Reverend Clay's wagon appeared at the fence line. Bo saw him coming but didn't pause in his work, hammering posts into the unyielding earth. "Seems to me," the preacher said, climbing down from his seat, "a man beating the ground that hard might be fighting something besides fence posts." Bo drove another nail, the impact jarring up his arm. "Got work to do, Reverend." "Indeed you do." Clay stepped closer, his weathered face serious. "But I'm wondering if it's the work the Lord gave you." The hammer paused mid-swing. Bo's voice came rough. "I did what needed doing." "Did you now?" Clay picked up a loose nail, turning it in his fingers. "Tell me something, son. Did the Lord release you from what he gave you to protect?" Bo's hammer hit the dirt. "I'm protecting them. Town would have driven them out in shame." "Ah." Clay nodded slowly. "So you drove them out first. Cleaner that way, is it?" The words landed like a slap. Bo turned away, unable to meet the older man's knowing gaze. "Sometimes," Clay continued quietly, "the Lord gives us not just people to protect, but battles to fight. Seems to me you've chosen the easier path, letting shame win again." Back in town, Clara sat at her small desk, staring at the letter that had arrived that morning. The Cheyenne Girls Academy's neat letterhead bore good news. Her application from months ago accepted, a position waiting, a fresh start, far from Bitter Creek's judgment. She'd written that application in another life, before Ellie had found a father in Bo's gentle strength, before Clara herself had dared to dream of love again. Now the escape route she'd planned felt hollow. Mrs. Clay appeared at her door that afternoon, bearing a basket of fresh bread and concern in her kind eyes. "I brought you something to eat. You're looking peaked, dear." Clara managed a weak smile. "You're too kind, Mrs. Clay." "Kindness is what's needed, I think." The older woman settled into a chair. "Wendell told me about the Cheyenne offer." Clara nodded, her fingers tracing the letter's edge. "It would be simpler, to start fresh." "Simpler, yes." Mrs. Clay's voice was gentle. "But when has running from pain ever healed it?" The question hung in the air between them. Clara looked around her small home, at Ellie's drawings tacked to the wall, at the book Bo had been learning to read with them, at all the pieces of the life they'd begun building. "Will running again save us?" She whispered, more to herself than her visitor. Mrs. Clay reached across the table and covered Clara's hand with her own. "Perhaps the question isn't what will save you, but what's worth fighting for." Outside, the spring wind stirred the dust on Bitter Creek streets. It carried the sound of the school bell, of children's laughter, of life continuing despite broken hearts. In his line shack, Bo stared at the storybook he'd left on his table, its pages marked where Ellie had last helped him sound out words. And in her home, Clara held the Cheyenne letter, weighing the cost of surrender against the price of standing firm. Saturday's first light crept over Bitter Creek, painting the dusty streets in shades of amber. Clara stood at her window, watching the sun climb above the distant hills. Her trunk waited by the door, packed with what remained of their life here. The noon stage would carry them away from all they'd built and lost. Ellie slept on, clutching her doll, tear tracks still visible on her small cheeks. Clara touched the window glass, cool against her palm. The town was already stirring, merchants opening their shops for the weekend trade. Women in their best skirts headed to market, men gathered near the smithy, and children darted between wagons with hoops and sticks. As the morning wore on, an unusual crowd began forming in the town square. Clara noticed them while securing the last of their belongings. People weren't dispersing after their shopping, but lingering, gathering near the white-painted church steps. Reverend Clay stood there, his Bible in one hand and a worn leather journal in the other. The morning light caught his white beard as he raised his voice above the murmur of the crowd. "Friends," he called, "I hold here words written 5 years ago by a man seeking redemption." He lifted Beau's journal, words that remind us all what mercy means. The square fell silent. Clara found herself drawn to her door, stepping onto her small porch. "I am not what I can make," Clay read, his voice carrying clear across the square. "I am what I can mend." He looked up, meeting eyes in the crowd. These words were written by Boaz Harrelson, after he put down his gun and chose a different path. A ripple went through the gathered townspeople. Clara's heart clenched at Beau's name. "This town," Clay continued, "was founded on second chances, on the belief that what's broken can be restored." He closed the journal carefully. "Today we face such a choice again." One by one, people stepped forward. Mr. Peterson, the general store owner, cleared his throat. "Miss Voss's account with me, it's cleared. No debt stands." Thomas Harper spoke next, his rancher's hat in his hands. "My men and I, we'll buy back that school plot. Railroad can have the north pasture instead." More voices joined in, offering help, support, acceptance. Clara stood frozen, one hand pressed to her mouth, as the community she'd thought lost to her transformed before her eyes. Sheriff Cutter stood at the edge of the crowd, his badge catching the morning light. Slowly he removed his hat and lowered his eyes. "The town council will review that land claim ruling," he said quietly. "Seems we acted hasty." Reverend Clay's voice rose once more. "Let us remember grace, friends. Let us choose to mend what pride has broken." The noon stage rattled down Main Street as Beau's boots pounded the dirt. His long stride ate up the distance between the livery and Clara's house, where the driver was already loading trunks. His heart thundered in his chest, but his voice came steady when he called out, "Clara, wait!" She turned from the stage door, Ellie's small hand in hers. The morning sun caught the tears on her cheeks. Beau crossed the last few steps and dropped to one knee in the dust before Ellie. His rough hands, gentled by love, reached for her tiny fingers. "Ellie," he said softly, "you still want me as your papa?" The child's face bloomed like a desert flower after rain. She nodded hard enough to shake her braids, then flung herself into his arms. Beau caught her close, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine that clung to her hair. Clara's voice broke the silence. "Let's not pretend anymore." She wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "No more hiding. No more running." The stage driver cleared his throat. "Mom, we're due to leave." "We're staying," Clara said firmly. "This is home." Word spread through Bitter Creek like wildfire. By evening, lanterns hung from the cottonwoods behind the schoolhouse, their light dancing on the faces of gathered townspeople. The trees rustled overhead, nature's own chapel ceiling. Reverend Clay stood beneath the largest cottonwood, his Bible open in weathered hands. Beau and Clara faced each other in the warm light, Ellie between them, holding both their hands. Clara wore her best blue dress, a spray of wildflowers in her hair. Beau had somehow found time to shine his boots and don a clean shirt. Their vows were simple, spoken clear and true. Beau promised to cherish both mother and daughter, to protect and provide, to love without condition. Clara pledged her trust, her faith, her future. When they joined hands, their fingers linked as naturally as branches twining. Reverend Clay's voice carried across the gathered witnesses. "He who cannot bear fruit may still shelter the orchard." He smiled at the new family. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The townspeople pressed close to offer blessings. Mrs. Peterson dabbed her eyes with her handkerchief. Sheriff Cutter shook Beau's hand, his grip firm with respect. Even old Thomas Harper removed his hat in reverence. Through it all, Ellie beamed up at her parents, finally whole and true. When Bo scooped her up in one arm and wrapped the other around Clara's waist, the child's laughter rang pure as church bells under the Cottonwood Cathedral. The autumn breeze rustled through the new schoolhouse's fresh-cut pine boards. 4 months had transformed the empty lot into something beautiful, a testament to what willing hands could build together. Wide windows caught the afternoon light, warming the rows of polished desks inside. The broad porch wrapped around 3 sides, offering shelter from sun and rain alike. Clara stood at her desk, watching her students file out for the day. Their footsteps echoed differently on the solid wooden floors, nothing like the creaky boards of the old building. Through the window, she could see Bo working with 3 older boys by the corral, showing them how to properly coil rope. He'd taken on training the orphans from the mission house, teaching them ranch skills that could earn them honest work. Little Ellie's voice rang out clear and strong as she tugged the morning bell's rope one last time, her favorite daily task. The sound echoed across the settlement, marking day's end just as it had welcomed the morning. Her dark braids bounced as she skipped down the steps, proud of her official duty. Clara gathered her books and shawl, nodding goodbye to Mrs. Peterson, who helped with the younger children now. The walk home took her past the garden Bo had started behind their small house. She paused at the gate, taking in the sight before her. Bo knelt in the rich soil, his big hands surprisingly gentle as they tucked seedlings into neat rows. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, dirt streaking his forearms. Nearby, Ellie lay curled on a quilt in the shade, her afternoon energy spent, one hand still clutching her favorite storybook. Clara quietly opened the gate and settled beside her husband. Without a word, she rested her head against his broad shoulder, breathing in the earthy scent of turned soil and honest work. The evening light painted everything in soft gold, from the new schoolhouse roof to the distant hills. "Town's quieter these days," she murmured, watching dust motes dance in the sunset. Bo nodded, his shoulder moving gently under her cheek. "Better for it, I reckon." Clara reached over to brush a smudge of dirt from his weathered cheek. "You were right, you know." She glanced at Ellie's sleeping form, then back to the man who had chosen to love them both. "You didn't need your own blood. You just needed to love." Bo's hand found hers, work-roughened fingers twining together like the vines they'd planted along the fence. They sat in peaceful silence, watching shadows lengthen across their garden, their home, their chosen ground, their place of lasting hope. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.